Welcome to Charts Today. My name's David Linton, and today's edition for Friday, the 14th of December, comes to you from London. And we start by looking at the dollar index and dollar pushing higher again, still holding its bullish position. The lagging line staying above the cloud. Upside targets still to play for. Dollar strength really becoming key, and this longer term chart just getting stronger all the time. So, dollar strength is really the key. Looking at the euro, we're weaker this morning, falling quite heavily against the dollar, down 1/3%, and we are entering this long-term weakness for the euro. Against the yen, the dollar's down slightly, but holding on to its bull trend on all three time frames. Sterling pushing lower again this morning, having gained this week. It's now falling back, and we're looking back to these downside targets. 122 is really the area. We've got 125 and 124 first off, but 122, and of course these downside targets activated with the 18-month lows that we've seen this month. So really sterling still looking very vulnerable indeed, and against the euro we're seeing sterling also looking less good here as well. Bearish on the long-term chart, bearish on the medium-term chart. Short-term it is holding its bullish position, but we've got downside targets hanging over us. Against the Swiss franc, sterling is actually just holding on here a little bit as well, but medium and long-term still bearish. And against the Aussie dollar, we have sterling just rising slightly. Bitcoin we're seeing is pushing lower. Overall, it's up slightly this morning, but realistically, it's still bearish on all three time frames. The S&P 500 index was relatively flat last night. The Nasdaq also relatively flat. The composite was down more, and we saw the broader based indices performing less well. Smaller UK stocks are struggling, and we see the Dow bearish below the cloud, medium and short term. The Russell 2000 index testing those lows again. 2000 stocks here just moving into bearish territory. This is effectively a market breadth measure for the market. The 2000 stocks in the US are now entering bearish territory, so not looking so good. The futures looking pretty worrying today. The S&P future down 1%, the Nasdaq E-mini down 1.2%. Confidence fading on the US-China trade discussions. The FTSE 100 down 1% this morning, and mid caps we're seeing down just 0.7%, but still looking bearish, long and short and medium term, bearish on all three time frames basically. The DAX down 1.3%, so we're seeing some quite heavy selling in Germany. The CAC 40 down 1.07%, and again bearish here. Just a medium-term downside target here, so a little bit of a lack of targets for the market. The Nikkei was down 2%. The Japanese 400 stocks was down 1.5%. So Japan was trading lower. The Hang Seng down 1.6%. Again, reflecting the sentiment on US-China trade wars, and Chinese growth also a concern overnight, and so we're seeing Chinese stocks sinking lower. And really these downside targets, I know I've talked about these all the time, but these downside targets hanging over the Chinese market still a really big worry. The Sensex was relatively flat overnight, down very slightly, and the Aussie market was down 1%. In line with that sentiment, Brent crude is down just under 1% this morning, and we're seeing WTI down 0.67%. Actually, WTI just holding on to its bullish position very but realistically we're just teetering along the bottom here. Might be a recovery. We tend to see the stronger period for gas in the new year, but for oil in the new year, but it'll be key. US nat gas down to $4.19, so $4.19. Breaking down here, we're seeing these candles now showing through. So interesting, having risen, we're now seeing some of that rise coming off the table. A lot of profit taking going on. Gold sitting at 1237. It's just turning short-term bearish on that stronger dollar, and silver actually holding its bull position just. US 10-year yields sitting at 2.88%. So 291, I should say, but we're holding that bull trend, but only just. And we're seeing German bonds up this morning on the bond price. So we're seeing still short term, we're not in a very clear picture, but medium and long term bond prices improving as sentiment weakens. That looking over to the stocks, this data coming from Yahoo Finance. We can have a quick look at the markets. We see a sea of red here in Europe. And the Nikkei we're seeing also lower, and so we are seeing quite a key move there. The Nasdaq overnight we've got Apple was up 1%, so they performed better, but we had Amazon down 1/3%, Google down just very slightly. Facebook was just up 1/3%, so it's still not looking great on the charts. And if we look at some of the others, Netflix was up 0.4%, Microsoft up 0.34%, and Tesla up 2.78%. Still one of the best looking stocks. It's amazing how they're starting to test their high for the year. And the relative, we see that Tesla now outperforming the Dow Jones Index this year by 15%. Who would have believed it after all the negative news we've heard on Tesla? In the Aussie market, quite a few stocks were up. Of course, we had some quite big performances here. Sigma Healthcare, Infigen Energy, but all of these trends are down. Aussie Pharmaceutical also down. And if we look at the downside, we had some pretty big falls as well. Nine Entertainment, Domain Holdings. So we are seeing some pretty big moves there. Nine Entertainment was one of the best performers yesterday, the worst performer today. So we're seeing a lot of volatility in stocks. In China, just one stock up, 360 Security Technology. Everything else was down. So it just shows how bearish that market's been. In Hong Kong, we had a handful of stocks up, Swire Pacific up 1.2%, but realistically, the market was a sea of red. Then Nifty 50, we had a slightly different situation with some of the top performers. Indian Oil up 3.5%, Infosys up 2%. The relative against the Dow Jones here just falling away a little bit. And if we look at the Nikkei, we see here again some green but mostly red. Looking over to Europe now, we take a look at first of all the FTSE 100 index. So just ranking by performance, we see that TUI is the worst performer today, down 2.9%, CRH down 2.8%, and WPP down 2.5%. Real big downtrends on a lot of these shares, and we see the prices just coming in here now from Yahoo. So some really big falls here. Royal Mail down another 2%. Ranking by percentage performance, GVC up 8%, Paddy Power, Betfair up 1%, and Pearson's up 0.6%. But we've only got a handful of stocks up in the UK market this morning. Looking at the 250, Capita down 4.3%. G4S down 3%, so we are seeing some pretty big falls here as well. Belfast BT up 4%, 4.8%. Across Europe, we've got quite a lot of changing here. GAM in Switzerland, further falls here. They've had a terrible 2018, falling lower. And in Paris, we've got Company Plastic falling as well. And if we look on the other end of the market, we do have some performances. We've got Scout 24 AG in Germany. They've had a big jump this morning. GVC Holdings up, as we talked about, and Belfast BT, for quite a few of the London stocks up. Pretty mixed picture, but overall, markets are falling pretty heavily as we end the week. That's it for today. Until tomorrow, happy charting. See you then.